Broadcasting from beautiful downtown Tallahassee, it's Nantan Lupin at the Drive-In.
Today is episode 24, The Magic Sword, 1962. To get here, we had to jump on the Basil Rathbone line from The Revenge of Frankenstein, 1958. The Magic Sword has been one of my favorites since I was a Ute. Fortunately, I haven't seen it since I saw it in the theater, and my memories constructed a better movie. Hey, but don't get me wrong, it was fun to watch, and you should definitely see it if you haven't. It is campy and quirky enough that you won't feel too bad wasting a lazy Sunday afternoon with this film. That is, as long as it doesn't cost you anything. Bert I. Gordon, B.I.G., directed this movie. He was known for making cheesy science fiction movies with unconvincing special effects. He was riding the wave of the big monster movies until American taste changed. The Magic Sword was one of his better received movies, and some of the effects aren't too bad, all things considered. He liked to use stars on their way out that want to make a quick payday and young talent that would read the lines and not ask for too much else. He followed this model to a T. First we have Basil Rathbone playing the evil wizard Lodac. Rathbone was a great actor, and I covered him in episode 21, The Revenge of Frankenstein, 1958, so I won't go into much detail here. All I will say is he only did a handful of films after this, and there was nothing special in the bunch. Estelle Winwood played the sorceress Sybil. Winwood was an amazing actress. She began her stage work in 1916, but didn't have a real screen debut until Quality Street, 1937. Then she went back to the stage for almost 20 more years. She reappeared in The Glass Slipper, 1955, as the fairy godmother. For the next 10 years or so, she played the same character. To quote IMDb, she was cast as an eccentric, frail old lady, some of whom could be deadly. During this time, she began to appear on television shows as well. At 84, she played a woman in love with Zero Mostel in The Producers, 1967. Her last film was Murder by Death, 1976. Carrie Lockwood was cast in the role of the young hero, Sir George. He was raised by Sybil, but they made it clear that he was of royal birth. I always knew Lockwood as the guy in the second Star Trek pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, 1966, that got glowing blue eyes and godlike powers along with Sally Kellerman. But alas, he did a lot more. Lockwood attended the University of California on a football scholarship. He began his career as a stuntman and stand-in for Anthony Perkins. Around 1959, he started picking up small bits in movies and television shows. For the next decade, his TV roles increased, and for a time, he was married to Stephanie Powers. But this new bit of information threw me for a loop. I had forgotten that he was in Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, 1968. The role was that of Dr. Frank Poole. So he is the guy that Hal killed. How cool is that? Anne Helm was Princess Helene, the love interest of two. Helm was primarily a TV actress, but she did have a string of movies. For a time, she dated Elvis Presley. Liam Sullivan was the treacherous knight Sir Branton. He was a stage and TV actor and may be best known for a role he played in one episode of Star Trek as King Parman. Danielle de Metz played the role of Minuet. She was only on the screen for a minute. Maybe they cast her because she was French and they wouldn't have to pay a screenwriter to write in French. Merritt Stone played the king and father of Princess Helene. He was only in 8 movies, with this one being his last. In the Rebel set of Mystery Science Theater 3000, they started chanting Merritt Stone. Later they were looking for the great Merritt Stone. Very confusing, but there is not much information on this guy. I never did find out who the Dapper Chimp was, but the Siamese twins were played by twin brothers Nick and Paul Bontempi. Jack Coslin played the ogre and had his face masked for the entire scene. He did a lot of bit work in 1950s science fiction in movies such as Earth vs. the Spider, 1958. He did a few stints on Rawhide and is best known for working with Clint Eastwood on Play Misty for Me, 1971, Magnum Force, 1973, High Plains Drifter, 1973, and The Eiger Sanction, 1975. Malia Nurmi, a.k.a. Vampira, was cast in the role of the hag/sorceress. Malia was born in Petsamo, Finland, but was raised in the U.S. She was the original glamour ghoul, Vampira of the late 50s television. Malia arrived in the United States with her family as a baby and lived a rather nomadic existence, at first as her father was a writer who lectured on temperance. Director Howard Hawks noticed Malia when she was in a midnight show titled Spook Scandals. Hawks took the beautiful blonde to Hollywood in hopes of turning her into the next Lauren Bacall. Malia was cast in the film version of the novel Dreadful Hollow. The project got put on hold so many times she walked away from her contract. For a time, she worked as a pin-up girl and in chorus lines. For a masquerade contest, she invented the character Vampira. The look was long dark hair, long nails, heavy base makeup, a tiny waist, plunging neckline, and a tight black dress. Of course, she won the contest, but also got a gig on the late-night TV horror show for the 1954-55 season. This resulted in an Emmy nomination, being on the cover of everything, and being seen everywhere. Unfortunately, she is most often associated with the Ed Wood Plan 9 from Outer Space 1959. Bela Lugosi was a big fan of Vampira and wanted to work with her. However, he died in 1956 during filming. Wood shot some scenes with Vampira and added them as a tribute to Lugosi before the film was released. By the end of the 50s, Malia's career was ending. She took roles in movies like The Beat Generation 1959, Sex Kittens Go to College 1960. Her last role was a cameo in I Woke Up Early the Day I Died 1998. She died in 2008 at the age of 85. One of the problems I had with this film is that the knights were killed off so fast there was no time to form an attachment or even care. This is except for Sir Patrick of Ireland, played by John Maldine. The actor was very slight and had an Irish brogue.
And last, Sir Patrick of Ireland.
We pledge our lives to your service and to the Princess Helene until she's safe.
I swear they were panning to the young girls with a Beatle type, but the Beatles were 2 years out at the time this movie was made. The other knights are Jacques Gallo, Sir Denis of France; David Cross, Sir Pedro of Spain; Taldo Kenyon, Sir Anthony of Italy; Angus Duncan, Sir James of Scotland; Leroy Johnson, Sir Ulrich of Germany. Story: George, Gary Lockwood, is the adopted son of the sorceress Sybil, Estelle Winwood. It seems they live in a cave with a smirking chimp and stereophonic Siamese twins played by Nick and Paul Bontempi. Sybil is a bumbling scatterbrained nitwit that can't get her spells right. But George has a bigger problem. He spends all his time down by the magic lake watching visions of the lovely Princess Helene, Anne Helm. For example, he watches the princess swimming nude in her lake. Yeah, that's true love. So George is watching the princess towel dry when a sorceress, Malia Nurmi, aka Vampira, materializes. She gets green glowing eyes and kidnaps the princess. Seeing this, George runs back to the cave and tells Sybil.
I must leave here. She's in danger.
Who in the netherworld are you talking about?
Princess Helene. I loved her from the first moment I saw her.
A reflection in the water and you call it love, you silly child.
She uses her magic mirror to check the problem. Sybil sees Sir Branton, Liam Sullivan, telling the king, Meritstone, or the Great Meritstone, that the girl is missing. The somewhat simple king says lock down the castle. About that time, the wizard Lodac, Basil Rathbone, busts into the room. They said he was picked up for skulking, a word clearly not used enough in day-to-day conversation.
Who is this? We found him skulking within the eastern postern, my liege. He won't speak.
There are means to make him speak.
Sir Branton. Your most serene majesty, you can call off the search. The princess, your daughter, is in my castle, under lock and key.
He gives him a little thunder display and then tells the king that the king's father had Lodac's sister executed for witchcraft. Lodac says he will feed the princess to his dragon in 7 days. He warns him that there are 7 curses on the road to his castle if anyone tries to rescue her. Sir Branton is acting all cocky, and the king offers the princess in marriage and half his kingdom to the man that saves her. Back where Sybil and George are watching, Sybil tells George that 300 years ago, her father and brother, who were great sorcerers, were eaten by Lodac's dragon, and George can't go play.
All I want is my freedom so I can save the girl I love. But you wouldn't understand that, not being mortal.
I've tried to do my best.
She does drop the bit that he is of royal birth so he can marry a princess. To cheer him up, Sybil turns into a black panther, the animal, which seems to be the only trick she can do correctly. Later, she takes him to a lower level of the cave and shows him the things she plans to give him on his 21st birthday. First is a magic horse that is the fastest in the world, armor that can't be breached, an unbeatable sword, and a magic shield. She also shows him 6 knights in stones that are the greatest knights in the world. George touches his sword to the floor, and a crack opens. He traps Sybil and revives the 6 knights with the sword. The group of 7 head to the castle where Sir Branton is still bragging and preparing to take the quest for the Princess Helene. The king notices a dragon ring on Sir Branton. Branton tries to discourage the 7 other knights, but the king decides they must go along. Princess Helene is thrown into a dungeon where 2 other princesses are about to be fed to Lodac's dragon. Lodac shows Helene the rescue party in a magic wall view just as they arrive at the first curse.
I'll show you the young fool.
Tell me, which one is George?
The youngest. He's in the lead, riding with Sir Branton.
The first curse is a giant ogre with the hair of Michael Landon in I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and wearing what could possibly be an ape mask. George uses the speed of his magic horse to ride in circles until the ogre gets dizzy and falls down. George then stabs him. After Lodac leaves the cell, 2 little people enter Helene's cell and laugh as they do spirit hands at her. She escapes the cell and makes it to the main hall. She sees a cage with tiny people and then a table of Zippy the Pinheads appear. Then Lodac returns and sends her back to her cell. The ogre managed to kill 2 of the knights, and they all comment that Branton did not help in the fight or the burial. Branton returns saying he has reconnoitered ahead. When the knights ask what is ahead, he says wait and see.
I thought it wiser for me to ride ahead and reconnoiter.
What did you find?
Mount your horses, gentlemen, and come see for yourselves.
They ride towards the next curse, which is a swamp, but no ROUSs. It has boiling water that dissolves flesh. One of the knights falls into the water and George goes to help. As George is pulling the knight out, Branton kicks him in the back, sending both into the boiling water. The knight's flesh is boiled away, but George uses his magic sword to get out. Branton tells the other knights that both are dead, but looks sick when George returns. I guess George didn't feel the foot on his back. They all ride on. Back at the cave, the chimp and the twins are playing chess. Sybil breaks out of the crack and has a well-deserved drink. Sybil finds out George is on a quest against Lodac. She uses the magic mirror to check in on George. The knights are openly calling Branton a traitor. Branton sneaks away in the night, but the French knight wakes and follows him. At a cottage a short distance away, Branton meets Lodac, and this is the first time you realize that the 2 are in cahoots. Branton has somehow taken the ring of Lodac and is forcing him to let Branton save the princess. As the French knight arrives, Lodac sends a maid, Danielle de Metz, out singing a French song. Well, Frenchmen like Vikings can't control themselves, and they start slopping it up. The maid turns into a green-eyed hag, vampira, and is about to kill the knight when George arrives and drives her away with the cross on his shield. They confront Branton, and he tells them he came to the cottage to reconnoiter. Lodac turns the hag into a spider for failing to kill the knight. Finally, Lodac realizes that George has magical powers from Sybil. He also reveals that he intends to kill Branton and feed the princess to the dragon. Lodac confronts Sybil over the mirror cam and short-circuits her view. Sybil tries to brew up a potion to help George. Her failed magic leaves George without protection when he needs it the most. 2 knights are sent ahead by Branton, and the land becomes hot. The 2 knights are dying, but they warn George and the Irish knight back. Branton is not sweating. He rides away to a cave and traps George and the Irish knight inside. Branton reveals he is working with Lodac. George's sword will no longer work to make an opening. Evil spirits attack the pair. They look like tiki gods or maybe shrunken heads. One of the spirits takes over the Irish knight, but he manages to open the wall for George. Branton and Lodac use the fire cam to spy on George. Lodac reveals it was the power of Patrick's faith that opened the wall, and it was stronger than his magic. George rides up to the castle and walks right into Helene's cell. Lodac and Branton watch using invisibility. They get all kissy-faced and then they head back towards the gate. Lodac and his gang of pinheads materialize around George and Helene. Branton and Helene begin to leave, and Lodac reminds Branton to give back the ring. He foolishly does. Helene turns into the hag. Lodac finds out that you can't make a deal with an evil wizard as Lodac mounts his head on the wall. They take George to the dungeon and get Helene ready for the dragon. Sybil is still working on the spell, but heads to Lodac's castle to help George. Lodac brings Helene to the dungeon for their last goodbye. One of the pinheads lets the little caged people escape. They go immediately to free George. Helene is tied up in King Kong fashion for the dragon. Once free, George gets his horse and spear and fights a two-headed fire-breathing Chinese-style dragon, very reminiscent of St. George slaying the dragon. Sybil lands on the castle wall and approaches Lodac, who, while polite, is distracted by the fight. The dragon dehorses George. Sybil remembers the spell, and magical George is back. He kills the dragon and frees Helene. Sybil steals the ring from Lodac as he watches his beloved dragon die. Lodac begins cursing the couple, but Sybil turns into a panther and kills Lodac. Rathbone could really act. The scene changes to the royal wedding, and the 6 knights are returned to life good as new. World-famous short summary: 2 young voyeurs find true love. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Remember, you can find all of the links at snarkymoviereviews.com, and I appreciate those reviews in iTunes.